Let's open a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this day. Lord, we pray you'll bless our time together. Pray that you will give us the wisdom, the knowledge, the courage to stand firm in an increasingly evil day in a world that is in quite a bit of turmoil. Bless us today in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, today we're going to talk about providing the missing context. You know, when you post on Facebook or Twitter or someplace, these crazy fact checkers who nobody knows who they are, they pop up and they say, this post seems to be missing context, so it may not be true. Well, we're going to provide you for all the missing context today on some of these stories. Here's some of the platforms that we're on. Would appreciate it if you would like YouTube, Rumble, subscribe, like, share, dislike if you want, whatever you want to do. We don't get really, dislikes don't show up anymore, so sorry about that. What happened was that the videos being put up by the White House, particularly the press conferences of Jen, or Cruella von Pissuckerberger, as we call her, they were getting 50 likes and 3,000 dislikes, all but consistently. And so that was, I guess, harming their poor little psyches there as they tried to steamroll over everybody else in the world. They just can't take it. As I've said, this is one of those weeks where you would conclude, and you'll see when I get to there, that if hypocrisy was water, the world would drown. It would be another Noah's flood. And God said he wouldn't send another Noah's flood of water, but boy, the flood of hypocrisy is sure great. So we talk about the convergence of events each week, the things that are speeding up. This is my grid work that I use, acceleration. Things will happen more quickly, convergence, a lot of these lines of Bible prophecy. We know they're fulfilled there's some generalized descriptions as to how they're fulfilled, sometimes more specific, but they'll all the things that will need to be in place are going to be converging at the same time. So you're going to see things coming about wars and rumors of wars and certain specific wars that are mentioned in the Bible. You're going to see those building. You're going to see this beast empire that's going to come. You'll see all these things happening. We see the beginnings of those. And so that goes to the next one, is logistics. You don't have a great battle without great armies. So we know that if it talks about a great and mighty army in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, there's going to be a great and mighty army. Now, we don't know exactly what the great and mighty army looks like, and we know that things change because now, I don't know if I have a report on this today, but for example, drone technology has really changed how armies are able to interact on the battlefield, so that a smaller country can punch way above its weight class, particularly with missile technology. And we'll see some examples of that today. And then understanding, as it says in Daniel, as we get closer, it will, many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And it says the wise will understand and instruct many. I use this, by the way, I did 2 midweek updates this week. Don't get used to that. But also ask for prayer for my brother-in-law's family, nephew and niece. My brother-in-law passed away this week in St. Louis, about a week ago. He was 84, so he's with the Lord, so he was saved, and we have no doubt about that. But I mentioned in one of my updates that this is a picture of part of the electrical grid, the endpoint electrical grid, how it's in Beirut, Lebanon. Now that looks like it might not work all the time. But sometimes when I'm sitting there, and the picture that I thought of was, that looks like my browsers. I use a number of different browsers, and then I'll have 50, 60, 80 tabs sometimes open on one of the browsers. And so that's what the information coming into my head looks like during the course of the week. And I try to synthesize it and get it down to something that's coherent. Doesn't always work, but I try to do that. But there is a lot happening, as you may have noticed. So we'll talk about some of those today. I will touch on a few of the themes that I talked about in my updates. The one was essentially about the Canadian truckers and the response to Charlie Vector 019er in some quarters, in some places. And then I talked about Russia and Ukraine, but I'll talk a little bit about that today. If you want an update from last week, I'll just remind you if you didn't see it, I did a pretty extended talk about the East Med pipeline, which is, I think, fairly significant. I don't know if I would say harbinger, or seems to be playing into this end time geopolitical alignment, particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean involving Turkey and Israel and others, and Lebanon. And I'll mention a little bit about that today as well. So if you want to see that, I'm going to do a standalone presentation at some point about the East Med pipeline. I pulled together, I think I have 80 files to put into slides at least. So I don't know when I'll get that done, but we'll try to get it done. So here's an interesting story. Now, we'll talk about Ukraine. You're getting a lot of propaganda from both sides in this Ukraine thing. I'm not sure exactly who we work, but here's an article by a guy named or interview with a guy named Chalmers, who has written about artificial intelligence, technology, philosophy, and what all of this means. We're seeing this, I don't know how else to describe it. Joe Allen, who you can follow at JoeBot, JoeBot XYZ on Twitter. And I think Singularity Weekly is one of his websites where he writes. He also writes other articles. But he talks about the fact that there's a real spiritual thing going on here with this singularity that artificial intelligence is leading to. And that behind what Elon Musk says, and a lot of people like Musk, he's created a successful car company. He may be the richest person in the world. He's going off into space. But there's really when you really analyze what he's saying, there's there is a dark, sinister spirituality behind a lot of what he talks about. And we need to be careful with this because there's a war, spiritual war going on. In Ephesians chapter 6, it says this. Finally, my brethren, verse 10, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. And boy, is that ever true, as the things we're just seeing going on. There is a spiritual component behind this. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith you shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. For me, that utterance may be given unto me, that I may open my mouth boldly to make known the mystery of the gospel. And that's really what we should be about in this time. You know, when you live in a dark place, even a little light really has an impact, let alone the impact that the light of the gospel of truth will have on the world if we freely share it with people. And we don't know the impact that we have in this life. We'll know someday. We'll know. But we need to be sharing that gospel that's talked about in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 1 through 4. So here's this Chalmers guy, his philosopher, and he's written extensively about extended minds, talking about how we outsource an expanding share of our cognition to computers. And that's true. It was less than 30 years ago that I got my first work computer. I remember it. A PC. Prior to that, I'd had a terminal at my desk where I could access a computerized database of legal research that now has almost all the knowledge ever digitized, all the knowledge in words digitized in a searchable database. When I started law school, they had 4 years of Ohio cases online, which didn't really help us much in Indiana, but it was still like, and there was one terminal for the whole law school of 850, 900 students. So knowledge has really changed, but we've outsourced a lot to computers. My first computer had 2 megabytes of RAM and a whopping 40 megabyte hard drive. Our whole network for 90 users at that law firm had less than a gigabyte of storage. Things have changed. Now we think about, we have way more in our one phone. We'll have hundreds of times more than we had in an entire network back in those days. So this philosopher, Chalmers, says, this is in the Financial Times, says this can be useful, outsourcing our cognition to computers. This can be useful. A smartphone can help us remember telephone numbers or reach a destination. A brain-computer interface can help us hear better or counter Parkinson's disease. But with our growing reliance on ubiquitous technology, he suggests that we are in effect now developing an exocortex, an external device-driven brain that is increasingly controlled by the giant tech companies. These corporations are basically now becoming part of my extended mind, he said. I mean, Apple maybe 20% of it, Google 20% of it, and Facebook 10%, who's to say? His hope that we will find alternative ways of augmenting our intelligence that are not so heavily intermediated by such companies, but that comes with a problem. Neuralink, this is the company that Musk says this year will be starting planting a chip in people's brains. So you can just plug in. Well, if you can plug in, maybe they can send in more information, but turn off other information. And see, this is the problem. This is Tower of Babel type stuff where men are trying to become God. And then you add on top of that all the talk about we're going to do gene editing. Let me ask you this. With the current environment, do you think that the people that are deep into scientism are going to be Judeo-Christian ethic oriented when they get to gene editing? I mean, did you see any proof of that over the last 2 years? What you should have seen, and here's the missing context on that, what you should have seen should have frightened you to death because of what people are doing. Now, we know how it ends. That's great news. But that doesn't mean there's some bumpy things before that. And so one of the things that they talk about, they're always talking about, we've got to control the narrative. So here's a company, this is a English company. It says powering solutions to extremism. And this is a company that's been consulted with, IDS Global, Powering Solutions to Extremism and Polarization. You can tell it's a British company because they put an S there where a Z belongs, and we forgive them for that. But these are consultants, and I talked about them once because in this whole context of building, okay, I'm not sure what happened there. Do you have me back, Brian?
No.
Do you have it back? Yeah, they're analyzing stuff. Are we okay? Okay. So we just need to get the way for them to put a big "get moving" on that screen in the back there. Anyway, so in the connection with extremism and the narrative that's been built about certain events at our nation's capital and elsewhere, and now with what's going on in Canada, this narrative that anybody who doesn't agree is an extremist. So this company, and as I've said, they've provided consulting to the Canadian government. And boy, can you see the Canadian government sort of following along with these, I don't know, I would call it a fascist think tank in England about controlling thought. And so one of the things they did was they looked at, this people saying that there was climate lockdown and culture wars, climate lockdown was coming. I've said this. That makes me, in their view, an extremist, a conspiracy theorist. Because we're not talking, who's talking about that? You guys are making it up. You're taking little snippets of things and you're running. Look at the executive summary. In September 2020, ISD analysts identified an emerging trend on social media relating to the term climate lockdown. This spike in volume seemed to be driven primarily by climate skeptics who claimed the Charlie Vector 019er pandemic was merely a precursor to future green tyranny, and that both governments and global elites would curtail civil liberties under the pretext of climate change. Over the following 8 months, analysts conducted a detailed study of the emergence and mainstreaming of this phrase across Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Yeah, well, and so they do. They have this great timeline, this very interesting timeline that they've built. One of the things they said is this World Economic Forum tweet, and this is what the tweet said. We're deleting this tweet. Lockdowns aren't quietly improving cities around the world, but they are an important part of the public health response to Charlie Vector 019er. And then they say that, you people, you talked about the Great Reset and these lockdowns, and now we're going to apply it to something else. And so I'm saying is, show me a reason not to think that when I listen to these people. We'll see. We'll just talk a little bit. So, look, here's a cover of Time magazine recently. And you can see how, everything has jumped, will never be the same. And then there was another back in, I'm trying to remember what it was, April of 2020, there was an actual magazine cover called The Great Reset. And so in this report that this IDS company did, they said, people are making way too much of this Great Reset. And it didn't help that that Time magazine actually did a cover story on it, a whole cover. That kind of misled people. But I could play you clip after clip after clip of news people talking about it, of government leaders talking about it, of government leaders like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who's now sort of wondering what's going to happen to her politically when they get rid of the lockdowns. A graduate, by the way, of the Global Leadership Institute that's run by the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab and the guys that did the Great Reset. In fact, Klaus Schwab wrote a book, The Great Reset. What was he talking in about that? His vision of a Great Reset. And he has all the elites of the world coming to his thing. Now that's morphed into a thing called the Great Narrative for a Better Future. And so do you see how this all fits together? The narrative is what they're trying to provide. And so when you go against the narrative, immediately you're said, well, you are missing context. Comrade Haller, you are missing context. So here's the Canadian trucker thing. We know this. I talked about it on my update I put up on Thursday. And the police have become hardline approach to the demonstrators. And I sit here and I look at this and I'm like, what happened to the police? Now look, these guys are disrupting things. But where were all these Canadian papers and the Canadian Prime Minister, for that matter, when Black Lives Matter was disrupting city after city after city, burning buildings? And you had this moron on CNN saying, with Burnings building behind him and people running around burning cars, and he says, they're mostly peaceful protests going on here. Come on, that's missing context. That's like turn around and take a look. So, and it's become very disruptive. A guy named Mark Carney, who has been touted as a potential Prime Minister of Canada, he's another one of these World Economic Forum types. And he was a director at the Bank of Canada, and he came out and he said, this is sedition. It's time to end the sedition. In our capital city, many people have been terrorized for more than a week. And what was I will bring in the testimony of the Canadian Prime Minister in a moment to tell you what was the terrorism that was going on. Now, somebody responded to this in a National Post and said, this is not sedition. I don't care what you think, Mark Carney. Oh, by the way, but I think that the protesters should all go home. And then this is some pictures of the bridge, Ambassador Bridge, between Windsor, Canada, and Detroit, Michigan, which is one of the most important trade routes in the world. You know, billions of dollars a year go across that bridge. And it's been closed down, and they're going to try to tow things off, but the tow truck drivers say, no, we have to work with truckers all the time. You think we're going out there and tow that? And people are upset that there's a vaccine backlash. The police, you see what they call jerry cans in Canada? The police are going out and taking those away from the truckers. We're going to freeze them out. We're going to take their water away too. So here's Canadian Parliament the other day. This is affecting Trudeau. His poll numbers are down, and here's a little debate. I like the debate in Parliament. I like the back and forth and yelling at each other. I'd kind of like to do that in the courtroom every now and then. It's like, that's ridiculous, and it's hard to not do that when somebody's making such a ridiculous point, which often happens of my opponent. I'm sure they never feel that way about me. So here's
just a short time ago, we had an election in this country where we asked Canadians how they wanted to keep fighting this pandemic. And their answer was clear. Canadians chose vaccines. They chose science. They chose to protect one another. Because Canadians know that's how we get back to the things we love. It has to stop. The people of Ottawa don't deserve to be harassed in their own neighborhoods. They don't deserve to be confronted with the inherent violence of a swastika flying on a street corner or a Confederate flag. Listened when things got better. We will continue to follow public health advice. We will continue to trust science as Canadians work to get through this. That's what people expect. I know people are tired. But we've seen it through the various waves, and they're receding over the past months. These pandemic restrictions are not forever.
Thank you.
This is Candace Bergen.
Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
When it comes to lockdowns and mandates, we're seeing things change very quickly, and rightly so. Dr. Tam has said that vaccine mandates should be reevaluated, and today the chair of the Quebec Liberal Caucus clearly and strongly stated it's time to end the divisiveness and the politicization and end the mandates. We Conservatives could not agree more. This cannot be a slow and dragged out process simply because of the Prime Minister's ego, pride, or denial. Canadians are too tired. Canadians need hope. So will the Prime Minister follow the science, follow the evidence, and the restrictions and the mandates?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, everyone is sick and tired of lockdowns, of the measures we have to do, of the sacrifices we've had to make. But Canadians have continued to step up over the past 2 years, been there for each other, been there to get vaccinated. And that's the unity we've seen across the country of people who've been there for their neighbours, who've been there for their frontline health workers. That's what Canadians are going to continue to do. That's how we get through and back to the things we love. We're going to continue to follow the science. We're going to continue to have Canadians' backs.
Okay, now see the party members behind him, they're all what? Wearing a mask.
Canada's banks.
Let's see if I can get to the part where she responds.
So again, I ask the Prime Minister, will he
they're
follow
all wearing
the evidence? Will he follow the science and the mandates and the restrictions quickly?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
So here they are.
Canada's banks
and here's what
are
Trudeau
governed
said.
by laws, regulations, and practices that ensure funds cannot be used for criminal act or illegal activity, and these blockades are illegal. Canadian banks are monitoring financial activity very closely and taking action as necessary. I want to make something very clear. The illegal blockades seeking to take our neighborhoods and our economy hostage, and the collective COVID fatigue we are facing are two very separate things. If you joined the protests because you're tired of COVID, you now need to understand that you are breaking laws. The consequences are becoming more and more severe. You don't want to end up losing your license, end up with a criminal record, which will impact your job, your livelihood, even your ability to travel internationally, including to the U.S.
Yeah, that would be a crime that they would deny bail for, sitting in your truck on a street. You know, we can argue about what's the best way to respond to this, but I will note this, that I saw person after person in Canada. I mean, they're having counter protests, which are okay, right? According to Trudeau. But the other people, no. You can't do that. Why, you're interfering with someone's business, I heard them say. What's been going on for 2 years? Millions of small businesses have been destroyed by these people. Did you see any compassion out of him or Doug Ford, this guy who's the premier of the Canadian province of Ontario? There's no compassion there. Goodness gracious. It shows how far we've gone. Now the trucker demonstrations are spreading around the world. And here's Klaus Schwab. Again, I'm a conspiracy theorist. I'm only going to play you what he said at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, September 20th, 2017, interviewed by, you might recognize David Gergen there on the right. And here's what Schwab had to say about his training of global leaders.
When you brought the Young Global Leaders Program here for executive education and then the Schwab Fellows. But there are 2 countries in the world now in which the young global leaders have emerged. Tell us just a bit about that in terms of the governance.
Yes, actually, this notion to integrate young leaders is part of the World Economic Forum since many years. And I have to say, when I mention now names like Ms. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are for our actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
He goes on to talk about, now we have a new category called the Global Shapers. And he said, when we interview people here at the school, do you think globally or nationally? And majority says, oh, I think globally. So it's not a conspiracy theory. Again, only providing you with the context that the fact checkers seem to always miss when they do this thing. So Schwab put in this organization back in 1992 called the Global Leaders for Tomorrow School. Here are some of the graduates: Angela Merkel, Gavin Newsom, Peter Buttigieg in the middle there, Emmanuel Macron, we'll see him a little bit later. Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates were in some of the earliest classes. And it says in the school's early years, it involved the members of each class meeting several times over the course of a year, including a 10-day executive training session at where? Harvard Business School. So there's Harvard again. Now the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, I'm not going to talk a lot about it this morning, issued a terrorism bulletin, National Terrorism Advisory System bulletin the other day. And here it is, summary of the terrorism threat to the United States. So what do they think is terrorism? And I've talked about this ad nauseum, that this is the narrative that they're building. Everything gets it. So the people in charge, like the people who come from the party that's in charge of things, by the way, many of whom now have been implicated in the Durham report that was issued the other day, on Friday, that they spied on the Trump campaign and Trump Tower. And I saw an interview with Trump being interviewed by Leslie Stahl. He said, they spied on me. And she's like, there's no proof of that. Well, now there is. At least you accepted all these reports that prosecutors did. Why not this one? Go home today, look at all the mainstream news media websites, and see how many talk about the filing that Durham made on Friday. I'm gonna guess you're not gonna find it hardly anywhere. I didn't see it in any of the mainstream papers that I looked at. But so here this says, while the conditions underlying the heightened threat landscape have not significantly changed over the last year, the convergence, so we'll give the DHS our guest prophecy updater tag for today, of the following factors has increased the volatility, unpredictability, and complexity of the threat environment. Number one, the proliferation of false or misleading narratives which sow discord or undermine public trust in government institutions. And see, here they now call it, it's not just misinformation, it's misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. So misinformation is you mistakenly share something that's not accurate. Disinformation is you should have known better. And malinformation is you just made it up to mislead us, which the Biden administration never does, right? And even the Republicans do it too. They all do it. And so here's a bulletin that they make a reference to. The rumor control startup page about misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And so here, but look at what they also talk about, the proliferation of false or misleading narratives. And what is it? This is from the DHS Bulletin: widespread online proliferation of false or misleading narratives regarding unsubstantiated, widespread events that happen around when people vote, and Charlie Vector 019 are grievances associated with these themes inspired violent extremist attacks during 2021. And of course, we have the foreign powers there. But the narratives, and so I'm just wondering, here's all these people who are coming out saying, we're easing the restrictions. We're getting rid of the mandates. Do they fall under this? So Candace Bergen, who said end the mandates, they would say, well, she's spreading misinformation or malinformation. But now 11 Democratic governors or 12 Democratic governors have said they're ending mandates. Are they spreading misinformation and malinformation? See, it's always a thing for them, but not for thee. And this is a clip from a State Board of Health rules that's being considered in the state of New York. The comment period runs out tomorrow. Quarantine shall mean the physical separation and confinement of an individual or groups of individuals who are reasonably determined by the state commissioner of health or local health authority to have been exposed to a highly contagious communicable disease, but who do not show signs or symptoms of such disease for such time as will prevent transmission of the disease in the clinical judgment of the state commissioner of health. Now, do you want that Kathy Hochul, who's not been elected governor, she came in because the other guy had to resign in a scandal, she's going to run the commissioner of health. Do you want her making decisions? Now, good news though. This one will warm your heart. In an Israeli classroom, the teacher announced, well, you'll know what she's talking about. It's in Hebrew, but here we go.
אני רוצה להודיע לכם שבהחלטת הממשלה הוחלט שמהיום לא צריך מסכות גם בכיתות. אתה יכול לקרוא אותה. חברים, לא צריך מסכות.
Okay, let's talk about Russia-Ukraine. Now look, this is kind of complicated. So I'm going to kind of cover a lot of territory very, very quickly. There's some things that indicate beyond what our government is saying that that Putin means business. He's trying to accomplish much more. Now, he sent some demands to the U.S. government back in December. The government has now responded, rejected most of them. And essentially, he wants NATO rolled back, and NATO will never grow, and NATO will never, defend anybody that's on a border with Russia, and things that they just can't agree to. This is a briefing that back in December 21st, that Putin and the Shogun, the head of the Russian Defense Ministry, had a briefing, and they have a website, you can go look it up, and they post these things, and they have briefings, they show the weapons that they have, and they show people doing exercises. And then this one, though, you see this one involved Ukraine. They were talking about Ukraine, and they showed the map there. But one of the things that Russia has done in Poland, up there on the left, the Kinzhal missile, it's a hypersonic missile. It means invincible. That missile has been deployed in Belarus on the border of Poland, where they've been having some military exercises. This is a missile that we cannot defend against. Here's some articles from Financial Times about the North Korea's developing hypersonic missiles. The United States does not have a defense to hypersonic missiles. There's no laser thing to shoot them down or anything like that. And now everybody's trying to do it, and there even have been some reports that the Iranians are trying to develop the technology also. So this is what I talked about, the logistics of Bible prophecy, and how did some of these countries who aren't these world superpowers, how do they punch way above their weight class and cause this problem. And part of it may be developing technologies. And we haven't even gotten into artificial intelligence and drone technology. In fact, Putin here this is back in 2 years ago. This is where he introduced this concept of the hypersonic missile. At a big meeting, he got in front of the elites of Russia, and this is how this hypersonic goes. They can fly anywhere from 5 to 12 times the speed of sound. So at 12 times the speed of sound, they're between 9 and 10,000 miles per hour. We don't have the technology to shoot them down. They don't have the technology to shoot them down. But these things can take out, one of them can take out a ship. They're nuclear capable. But look at this one. Look, that's Florida, and here comes a bunch of hypersonic missiles in. Well, who used to live in Florida there at Palm Beach? That's shown in the picture. You see the Iranians do this? So the people at this meeting with Putin, they loved it. It was great. So there's a lot of people who are trying to analyze Putin. Is he paranoid? Is he a megalomaniac? Is he, And the answer is, yeah, probably. He lives in a house as one of his homes along the Black Sea is estimated to be worth $1 billion. Has an underground hockey rink. How many of you have an underground hockey rink? Underground, not above ground on your street where they don't plow. But so this is Putin, and so people. There's all these things about, is he paranoid? You see these images in newspapers of him brooding, that type of thing. And Russia punches above its weight class. So here's a global GDP, and here, look at where Russia is. So the United States, this is from 2021, the United States has $22 trillion. But Russia is over there at 1.6 trillion. So you need to understand that Russia doesn't have the economic resources that the United States does. Its income is pretty much from selling weapons, but mostly from the sale of gas and oil. And they have the most, the biggest reserves combined of natural gas on the planet. Now, the other thing too is, and look, so Russia has a GDP that's equal to Brazil. Now they have less people, but look, Germany is almost 2.5 times the size. Even Italy has a greater GDP. The UK, of course. So this is, when I'm watching this from a Bible prophecy standpoint, and I see these, what I would call malign actors, and Putin's very clever. He will come out and say, this transgender stuff is just absolute nonsense. So I'm glad that he does that. But I don't know how much he believes that, or if he's just trying to control the narrative that he wants, because he worked for the KGB. He's had advisors who have a high spiritual mysticism quality to him. So here's some of the things that talk about Putin's bloody war. They're bringing in field hospitals and plasma supplies. So here along the border in Belarus, there's a field hospital. Here's a field hospital set up at another time. People are looking back, I was talking to somebody yesterday, is this 1938 Sudetenland, where the leader of Germany took over part of Czechoslovakia, that led to a Munich Accord, an appeasement by Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister? Remember, he comes back, I have peace in our times. Or is it going to be 1939 in Poland, where the leader of Germany actually invaded Poland in a war? So the question is, so a lot of people are saying this sounds like 1938. The U.S. has said it's going to be a horrible toll. I mentioned to you that Putin, this icon, the Lady of Kazan, and I want to apologize, I said that it led the Russians into battle against Napoleon at Waterloo. That happened I think in the Netherlands or Belgium, over in that area. And so I was wrong on that, but Napoleon did go against Russia, and he had a terrible result. And so people attribute this to this icon, which was, I guess, leading the Russian troops. I mean, Napoleon lost 80% of his men over a winter. It was a big mistake. Eventually led to his downfall. So they're having drills near in Belarus. People are upset. We're not sending troops into Ukraine. We're sending them into bordering countries, Romania, Poland, and elsewhere. Now they're talking about, the disruption to the gas supply. It talked a lot about the EastMed pipeline, which was hoped to give the people in Europe an alternative to Russian gas. People talk, well, Qatar, they have the biggest gas field in the world that they share with the biggest single gas field in the world. It's many, many times larger than the Leviathan field that the Israelis discovered about 10, 11, 12 years ago now. That's really just kind of coming online. But it was going to take 5 or 6 years or more to build that, to do the engineering and actually construct the EastMed pipeline. Turkey's come in and said, hey, just build a short pipeline up here. We'll take care of it. Oh, by the way, give us the cut of the transit fees that we're entitled to. There was even talk in the United States, well, maybe Qatar, maybe you guys could help, get liquefied natural gas over there. Well, that works, assuming you can get through the Suez Canal. We know the Suez Canal can be blocked by one ship, that a negligent ship, let alone someone who's really trying to block it. That would be a disaster. So Qatar's not really an alternative. We just don't have the infrastructure. So back in 2014, Putin took this icon, it's reported, flew it around the Crimean Peninsula and invaded Crimea. What's a common thing that happened, though, in 2014 that's now happening today with the pandemic and all of a sudden an increased demand for Russian natural gas? The price is way up. The price was way up relatively up in 2014. So when somebody's did a study recently, and they said when the price is up, Putin's going to look around to cause some trouble and get some things that he wants. Going to punch above his weight class. And it seems like that article, and I'm trying to remember where I saw it now, I just don't. The Russian Duma has a legislation pending in front of it that they might annex the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of over here in eastern Ukraine that are heavily or pretty much ethnic Russian majorities. Putin and Xi got together. They came out of this. They said, we're for democracy. And they also came out, so here they formed an alliance to defeat sanctions that are coming over Ukraine. The U.S., everybody's doing propaganda. Here's another thing. This sort of plays into Bible prophecy, I think, though. Why Russia and China are building up Iran. This new arrangement, though vulnerable, Tehran is the ideal Middle East partner in an alliance in order to destroy the U.S.-led world order. The Ukraine crisis exposes a flaw in President Biden's Iran strategy. Washington engages with Beijing and Moscow as if they share core U.S. interests with respect to Iran. And by the way, I don't know that Biden knows all this or remembers it, but Robert Malley, who's the lead negotiator in Vienna, he's a compromiser of the first order and pro-Hamas. And they just released the Houthis in Yemen. They said they're not a terror organization anymore. Well, what do you think's happened? Well, they've been sending drones and missiles into Abu Dhabi and Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, into Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates. So that's certainly what officials, this article in the Wall Street Journal says in Tehran, are saying. Last weekend, a spokesman for the Iran's parliament's National Security and Foreign Policy Committee said, in the New World Order, a triangle consisting of 3 powers, Iran, Russia, and China, ding, 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 has formed. And he was clear about the goal that this new arrangement heralds the end of the inequitable hegemony of the United States and the West. In some, the article says, China and Russia are building up Iran. Both need a partner in the Middle East devoted to resistance to undermine U.S. power. Why is the Biden team going along for the ride? Washington's approach should be more strategic among the members of the global alliance dedicated to destroying the American-led order. Iran is the most vulnerable. The job of the U.S. is to defend it. And I would highly recommend that you go listen to the last couple of weekly podcasts of the Caroline Glick podcast. She talks about this in an article in Israel Hayom on Friday. She also taught, you can get that at carolineglick.com. She talks about the fact that this Robert Malley guy, he wrote a paper when he was with this CIS group. He was CEO of it for a while. George Soros is or is on the board, the executive board of that organization, and they just go around try to make compromises. And compromises really, they don't work very well. And the other thing that they said here in their paper that they released, that they issued a joint statement about 6,000 words, and they said, listen, we are for democracy, we're against the expansion of NATO, and Russia's side reaffirmed its support for the One China principle, confirms that Taiwan is an alienable part of China and opposes any forms of independence of China. So the question is it just about Ukraine? Is it also going to be about Taiwan in the very near future? Now, I don't think anything will happen on Taiwan until after the Olympics are over, and it may be that Putin waits, but it did not go well. Well, Emmanuel Macron, he got involved. He went to Russia and then to Ukraine to try to negotiate a thing, and it didn't go very well for Macron. One of the first things he did was he refused a COVID test in Russia because he said, if you do the COVID test, you could get my DNA. Now, that's kind of interesting because a lot of people that are accused of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation have been saying that about the COVID test, but it's okay for Emmanuel Macron to say it. So I'm only providing context. This is what Emmanuel Macron himself said when he went to Russia this week. I don't want one of those tests, not administered by Putin. And there was a lot of back and forth, and this led to some, I love the creativity of people on the internet. By the way, the other thing that you learn about Macron saying he doesn't want Putin to get his DNA is that he has DNA. Remember when he came out, he said, I'm going to govern like a Roman god. Well, maybe he's not. Maybe he was just lying. But there was a lot of back and forth. This is what one person said, that Putin got the long table out because he didn't have a test, so he had to stay far away. So some people have made up some wonderful little videos. Here's one that I think gives you an idea of the back and forth. They also had a very fancy dinner, with like apple tart and that type of thing. And you'll see a picture of the menu in the upper left-hand corner. And here's somebody imagining what happened at dinner, between...
Vous voyez? Envoyez-moi un peu de pain et un couteau, s'il vous plaît. Voilà. Voilà.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, and here's another one. The long table, and you got to shout, right? So here's what somebody said they thought happened.
Cette journée tombe au 30e anniversaire de la reprise de ces relations diplomatiques et je veux ici redire combien la relation...
I don't know. I love the creativity of people. So, here's one that's like, those are so good, I wish I had done it. And here's an editorial cartoon showing Boris Johnson at the same table with a Tory donor because he's having some political problems. Well, Macron was, I think it was clear that this headline in the Daily Mail is accurate, that Putin made a fool of Macron.
Европейские страны автоматически будут втянуты в военный конфликт с Россией.
Do you realize if Ukraine joins NATO and decides to take Crimea, that the European countries will automatically get drawn into a military conflict with Russia? This is addressing Macron. Of course, NATO's united potential and that of Russia are incomparable. We understand that, but we also understand that Russia is one of the world's nuclear powers and is superior to many of those countries in terms of that. But there will be no winners, and you will find yourself drawn into this conflict against your will. You will be fulfilling paragraph 5 of the Treaty of Rome in a heartbeat, even before you know it. If he knows that article. Of course, the president does not want to see developments unfold this way. I do not want it either, Putin said. That is why he is here and has been tormenting me for 6 hours now with his questions, guarantees, and solutions. This is Putin in 2017 at the Vadal dialogue. It talks about we have nuclear weapons. It's an open secret. We've set up a system which still has to be improved. The system will offer early warning of the missile attack zone. We'll know where the missiles are coming, he says. This means that the system may identify any launches of missiles from any part of the world, from an ocean or from any country. Secondly, it may actually identify where the missile may hit. When we make sure that this is an attack against Russia only, listen to this. After that, we will make a reciprocal strike in response to the first missile. We cannot be the initiators of this disaster. Of course, in this situation, we are waiting for somebody else to use nuclear weapons against us. In that case, the aggressor should know that the consequences are unavoidable and that they will be destroyed in retaliation. We will not be victims because we are going to paradise, heaven, and they will simply die and not be able to repent. So, to make matters worse, the British Foreign Secretary Minister Liz Truss went to Russia. She was kept waiting out in the car. They told her to park down the street. She had to park down the street. I mean, very humiliating. I mean, this is a press secretary of a country that's got double the GDP of Russia, foreign minister. And she came back and Lavrov, I mean, this guy's been around forever. You know, these guys are well trained. And he essentially said, listen, at the news conference, I felt like I was talking to a deaf and dumb person. He actually said that. Now, so he didn't think the conversation went really well. And then he said, listen, you guys think that we got to wait till the ground turns hard like stone before we can invade Ukraine. Well, let me tell you something. I was listening to somebody, it was like talking to somebody who had already turned to stone. That did not go very well. The British press was having a field day with it. Now everybody's saying, get out, get out, get out. The United States have said, get out. The Israelis have told their people to get out of Ukraine. Somebody posted this, which I thought was a clever cartoon about U.S. embassies in Saigon, Kabul, and now Kiev. In the Washington Post, this is a report from a hearing that was held, I think earlier this week. The U.S. general who's taking over CENTCOM, the command of the Middle East, he was asked about the potential for repercussions in the Middle East of potential Russian invasion of Ukraine. So look, the Middle East is really where Bible prophecy is centered in terms of geopolitics and how the nations interact in the end times. But so this is where I think it's maybe tied in. So he's looking at what's going on in Ukraine. What's he say? Kirillov said he believes that it could spill over into Syria, where Russia already has a military base and troops. If Russia does invade Ukraine, they would not hesitate to be able to act as a spoiler in Syria as well. He added that the U.S. doesn't believe Russia wants to go to war with the United States. Another article at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, a U.S. failure in Ukraine crisis could lead to a conflagration in the Middle East and Asia. You can go look that up and read it. It is a difficult thing. It says this, Iran could unleash its proxies against American allies in the Middle East. Israel could decide to avoid notifying Washington before acting forcefully. A Russian victory in Europe could precipitate a conflagration in the Middle East. This is an analyst writing. Similarly, China could learn that the U.S. determination is melting away and its threats can be ignored. An attack on Taiwan could follow. So it would be sort of the dominoes falling. Ukrainians probably realize that we still live in a Hobbesian world where every state is on its own and life is often, quote, as Hobbes said, life is often, quote, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Are you ready to meet the Lord? Here's another, the potential impact of Ukraine-Russia conflict on the Middle East region. Talks about the Black Sea has become a flashpoint. And they said there's three things that we need to look at that are potential that could in fact impact the Middle East. And those would be energy, agriculture, and refugees. Energy being the Nord Stream, the gas supply. Russia wants Nord Stream 2 approved. Germany hasn't approved it yet. So about 30-40% of the gas that goes into Europe comes through pipelines in Ukraine. It's likely that those pipelines would be shut down. You may have noticed it's winter in the Northern Hemisphere. The gas prices are way up, 450% increase in natural gas prices across Europe. Talk about inflation. So Nord Stream hasn't been approved yet. It has a good capacity. It's kind of an engineering marvel. Here's a little bit. There's an article in this morning's London Times of London, talking about Nord Stream 2, and it was an engineering marvel. By the way, understand that compared to the East Med pipeline I talked about last week, the East Med pipeline has a stretch between Cyprus and Crete where the water, the ocean depth there is 3,000 meters deep. The depth, maximum depth that they had to do across the Adriatic Sea for Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream parallels Nord Stream 1 was about 215 meters. So it's 15 times deeper. That's a significant engineering feat. The other thing is agriculture. Ukraine has it controls 50% of wheat exports to the Middle East. Half of Lebanon's, 43% of Libya's wheat imports come from Ukraine. Egypt gets over 50% of its corn and wheat from Ukraine. And Ukraine has this rich black topsoil. It's a very high percentage of this type of topsoil. I think above 25% of this rich topsoil. We have some here in Ohio. There's another big section of up in the Canadian plains that some of you may be able to visit someday if there's a change in leadership. The guy who says that everybody else is shutting things down and they're bad because he shut the border down already for a lot of people. And then there's also a concern, this is from the Times of London today, millions of refugees could pour from one country to another. So there's a lot of things going on. So let me talk about a few other things. The Houthis in Yemen, here's an example. This is a missile hitting a hotel in Abu Dhabi the other night. So take the Houthis off the watch list. They start sending missiles and drones into the United Arab Emirates. This is a clip of these are Russian and Syrian jets flying along the Syrian border. There's some question, were they trying to send a message to Israel, or were they just trying to show everybody else that, look, while we're tied to, while we have things going on in Ukraine, we can handle things elsewhere. And this puts a lot of pressure on Israel because Israel's like, well, they got these hypersonic missiles. And now there's this one article, it says, are they trying to provoke Israel against Russian assets in Syria? This is an article written a week ago Friday by Eric Mandel in the Jerusalem Post. And they talk about, I've showed you this clip before of how, this is a Russian-made computerized graphic of a Ilyushin troop plane. I think it had 25 people on it. And as the plane was flying around, they say, well, what Israel did, Israel wanted to attack Damascus. So they cloaked. They got behind, strategically behind this airline, this plane to hide themselves. And then what happened was the plane flew into where the missiles were, and it got shot down. So Russians blamed Israel for that. The Alma Research Group, they think that it was really Russia trying to show everybody else what they're doing. But it also, Eric Mandel's article also talks about the fact that Israel or Iran is placing assets next to Russian assets to try to get Israel to trip up. And there was an attack in Syria again. Now, Israel's pretty good. They do pretty precision attacks, but even after the attack Thursday or Friday, Russia issued a thing and said, look, Israel, you need to stop these airstrikes in Syria. Something's going to go wrong. Seth Bransman a few weeks ago in the Jerusalem Post had a great article, Turkey's Israel agenda, giving nothing, getting everything. And you can see Seth, when he wrote this, was a bit frustrated. It seems like, what is going on? Erdogan, his economy is falling apart. He issues this propaganda. His poll numbers are way down in Turkey. And yet he runs around acting like he's in charge of everything in the Middle East. And he seems to get away with it. And I was talking with a Bible prophecy speaker friend the other night, and he said, look, what I said, we've been looking at Turkey for a long time now. And it was Bill Koenig. And I said, and I think Bill agreed that, at some point in this Bible prophecy thing, there are going to be things that happen that don't make any sense geopolitically. Why? Because there's a spiritual warfare going on behind this. And I think this is what's happening with Turkey. Turkey is clearly an important player in the end times. It was reported that Turkish industry was shutting down because they were getting less gas from Iran. Now, I think there may be a coming conflict between Turkey and Iran. We'll have to see how that plays out. I think you can read about that in Daniel chapter 8. And that's a controversial thing in Bible prophecy. We'll see how it goes. I mean, that's when we'll know how it's supposed to play out when it actually happens. But I think it's something to be watching for. Now, Iran came out and said, we had some technical issues, so it's no problem. Your gas has been restored. Even an article in the Financial Times about the strange resilience of Turkey's economy demands explanation. I mean, so here's an economist for the Financial Times, and he's looking at what's going on in Turkey. Everything is falling apart, inflation and that type of thing, but Turkey seems to be moving along. And he's sort of asking the question, how is this happening? Now, he gives a very technical explanation here. It could be. Now, Israel's also having, I mentioned this, Bennett came out and he said, we're going to stop Iran. We're going to do everything we need to do. The Israeli Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, at Tel Aviv University, issued a report. They also had a follow-on conference. This is their strategic assessment for 2022. It's only in Hebrew yet, so it's taken me a while to get through this because, well, I'm augmenting my brain with Google to translate the Hebrew, Google Translate. So I'm working through it. But they had a conference called A Time for Critical Decisions. They had a war game thing that they did about unrest in the Middle East. And I was talking to a briefing with General Amir Avivi of IDSF, Israeli Defense and Security Forum. the other day, and he was talking about the fact that there are big concerns about the unrest in Arab communities in Judea and Samaria and within Israel proper about how to manage that. So much so that the INSS strategic assessment said this is really the major thing that Israelis are concerned about, at least in percentage basis. They're still concerned about Iran, but the unrest in Arab communities, both within Israel and within that area called the West Bank improperly, that's a concern. So back in early January, Naftali Bennett, here's a protest in Gaza the other day that was kind of interesting. The people in Gaza were burning posters of Nasrallah and Soleimani. That's kind of unusual. David Weinberg in the Jerusalem Post wrote about the fact that, boy, we really think that INSS is getting off. What about, why don't we have like a good offensive strategy to like actually win a war? And he's written another recent article. He's also a contributor to this Israeli Defense and Security Forum that I was talking to the other day with the founder. And he goes, where's the Zionist fervor to upgrade security by taking the offensive against our enemies? So here's Naftali Bennett. He's talking about Iran. This is at the recent Davos meeting, World Economic Forum, about a month ago. Here's what he had to say.
We know at the same time that there is a growing optimism in certain quarters of the international community that Iran nuclear negotiations will progress in a positive direction and lead to an agreement. And how do you look at the prospects, and what would be an acceptable deal with Iran from the international community seen from your side, a kind of revised JSPOA?
Well, first we need to understand what Iran's position is in the Middle East. Iran is an octopus of terror and instability. Their head is in Tehran, and they send their arms all across the Middle East and get involved in Lebanon with Hezbollah, in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen with the Houthis. And they sort of have an anti-Midas touch. Every country they get involved with fails. Look at Lebanon now, falling apart. Look at Syria. Look at Yemen. And they have a modus operandi, a very clever one, where they sort of drive out terror, but through their proxies. So they lay back supine in Tehran, sort of remote from the terror that they're conducting, and they send others, their messengers, to conduct terror. We've seen it in Israel with Hezbollah, with Islamic Jihad, with the Iranian militias in Syria. How very comfortable is it for the mullahs in Tehran to cause despair? And I think we see a very similar situation with the Houthis. Who stands behind them? It's Iran. Who funds them? Iran. Who provides them the weaponry? Iran. Who directs them what to do? Iran. So I think the first thing is for the decent countries, the free world, to call Iran on what it's doing. They are the source of terror in the Middle East, and we have to fight back. The last thing you want to do with this sort of octopus is pour tens of billions of dollars into this apparatus. Because what will you get? You'll get terror on steroids, right? Everything we're seeing will be doubled and tripled because they'll be much stronger. I want to point out something. Iran, while it has this very image of a powerhouse, in fact, Iran is way more vulnerable than one would think. Their economy is tanking. The rial is depreciating. They are so incompetent that they're not able to get water to faucets in huge swaths of land. For example, Isfahan area. There's many Iranians that when they try and turn on the faucet, nothing comes out because of their regime's incompetence. We're seeing massive demonstrations of teachers, of judges, of pensioners in Iran. So it's a corrupt and failed regime. What we need is to stand strong until Iran goes through an agreement, but there's only one agreement. And that agreement, they call it longer and stronger. It means effectively that Iran has to give up its nuclear weapon program. Why would anyone legitimize their right to enrich uranium at massive capacity? They are now enriching uranium at 60% grade in these huge factories of uranium enrichment. Why are they doing it?
So here's the deal. In the Iran, so he also gave a similar talk to the INSS conference where he touched on some of the same things and one more thing that I'm going to talk about. But so what did the United States do? Well, 3 of our negotiating team in Vienna quit because they didn't like the way Robert Balley was running things because he's giving in too much. They reduced sanctions, ended a sanctions waiver on the civilian nuclear plant, which will result in $29 billion being released to Tehran. That's real money. Now, that's not as much as the second Obama administration did, but the third Obama administration is working on it. While the president of Israel was in the United Arab Emirates, the Houthis sent some missiles, drones, into the United Arab Emirates. And clearly that was done. Now, the missiles were intercepted, but the missile was intercepted during this historic Israeli visit. This is the Houthi commander saying, we've got thousands of drones and missiles we're going to send in all at once at some point. And that's an Iranian Shiite militia publication cartoon of what they want to do to the world's tallest building with a drone. So you understand, this is all, they always tip their hand as to what they're going to do. And Bennett was correct. Look, we've got to do this. Now, at the INSS conference, he came in, and one of the things he said during his talk there was, look, we have a laser defense system. I've played you a clip of it. I'll show you that in just a moment. And he says the campaign to weaken Iran has begun. This campaign is conducted in all dimensions: nuclear, economy, cyber, overt and covert operation actions alone and also in cooperation with others. Now, in follow on to that talk where he mentioned the lasers, he said, we're going to deploy these lasers to shoot down Gaza missiles. And here was, when they did a test of this last year, this is what the video looked like. What Naftali Bennett, you can see him up there, he's talking in that insert. You don't need to show that because we know what he looks like. But this is, the Israeli defense contractor and IDF put up this video about their laser-controlled system that they're going to use to shoot down missiles and drones. And this is what Naftali Bennett said. Within a year already, the IDF will bring into action a laser-based interception system, first experimentally and later operationally, first in the south, then in other places. And this will enable us, as the years advance, to surround Israel with a wall of lasers which will protect us from missile, rockets, UAVs, and other threats. But in fact, it will take from the enemy the strongest card that it has against us. The economic equation will be overturned. They will invest much, we little. Because if you're able to intercept a missile or rocket with an electric pulse that costs several dollars, as opposed to $100,000 to set off one of the Iron Dome missiles to shoot a missile down, the economic equation changes. So look, right now this is sort of a computer game type stuff. The people that I've talked to, in fact, there was a article that followed up Bennett's speech at the INSS conference, and it was called, and it's great if it works. And they have tried it against a single drone, which flies much slower than a missile. Even the United States is the only one that tried to deploy anything yet, and it's expensive, cumbersome. So we don't know exactly how that's going to go. But it's, it makes for great computer graphics, though. Give them A+ for that. And this is the one that you did last summer. They did a drone, and they shot it down. So here's what one of the defense analysts said at the Jerusalem Post: Bennett's bluff on lasers. No answer to Hezbollah, delayed answer to Hamas. Those who read carefully his speech about a new laser defense system will realize that less was promised than some of the loud headlines the speech produced. Beside the positive value of trying to attract additional investment in these systems, much of the headlines to the speech was a bluff, because lasers are not predicted to provide real defense against Hezbollah and Hamas for several years. And then a defense analyst that I talked to this week, or listened to this week, he said the same thing. Might lasers supplant Iron Dome over the next 5 to 10 years? They hope so. And should money be directed to get to that point? Absolutely. But there needs to be honesty on this. Hamas, which had less than 20,000 rockets during the Gaza war in May 2021, which Israel clearly won operationally, but Hamas controlled the narrative. They got hammered in the press about that. So this is a little bit of hype. Okay, we'll finish up. Let's see if I have anything. Okay, give me 5 minutes. I think we can get this done. I would highly recommend, though, that you go and read, because we know that one of the things we talk about is rising anti-Semitism. Here's Gantz went to Bahrain, also signed a defense pact, another historic thing that happened. But here's the Amnesty International. They came out with this report, and this is what the article says. Amnesty International is the fourth left-wing NGO, non-government organization, to accuse Israel of the crime of apartheid in the last 2 years. It follows similar accusations by Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem. Yesh Din makes a similar accusation, but limits its charges to the West Bank. The others' reports spoke of Israeli actions in apartheid within Israeli sovereignty and areas of military rule, but Amnesty is the first to do so so forcibly place the report at the center of an international public campaign that would target the International Criminal Court, the United Nations, and Israel's diplomatic relations, including its strongest allies. It's not totally new, but it is an escalation. These date back to about 2009, and this is the report. This is a picture of the report. Israel's apartheid against Palestinians, cruel system of domination, and crimes against humanity. It is just, even the ambassador to the United States, who's from the United States, Tom Needys, who's in Israel now, who is dyed in the wool, full-on two-state solution. And he says, come on, this is absurd. That is not the language we have used and will not use. And they did a news conference in Jerusalem. These are the Amnesty International, thugs. They're awful people. And so here at BBC, Israel policies amount to apartheid. Financial Times, Amnesty accuses Israel of apartheid. CNN, I'm surprised they're on board with this. I guess they're still in business. I didn't know, because I haven't seen much of them lately, except people getting fired for all kinds of shenanigans. Amnesty accuses Israel of apartheid. And it prompted an angry response from Israel. Well, good. I hope I was really mad. This is a Turkish newspaper. That headline says, Israeli reaction is a sign of fear. So because Israel, so here's Erdogan on the one hand trying to make nice with Israel, and on the other hand, newspapers that he controls, because he's taken over the press, he's taken over the courts, he's taken over the judicial system over the last 10 years. They're saying, oh, see, we got them right where we want them. Look how they reacted. They're scared. And so this is other headlines, Kuwait Times, Amnesty joins in this. The Jerusalem Post and the Wall Street Journal said it was the apartheid libel of Israel. There were a number of articles, Amnesty's shameful attack. Here's a quote from the report. In December 2008, November 24, I want you to listen to how they write this. Okay, and this is the problem that I had. I went to that Christ at the Checkpoint conference a few years back, and it was talking to the exact same kind of people. They there's a lot of times, I'm sure you have this problem now. It's like you watch something on TV, you read something on social media, and it's sort of like, what planet are people living on? Am I in a different parallel universe? Maybe there is multiple universes. And I'm seeing part of the other one, and I don't like what I'm seeing because these people, they can't reason. So this December 2008, November 2012, July 2014, May 2021, Israel launched military offensive against Gaza while Palestinian armed groups fired rockets from the territory into Israel. Listen, here's what happened. They fired the rockets first. Israel responded. 20,000 rockets last May. What is Israel supposed to do? Nothing? You don't know if they're going to hit somebody and kill them. What kind of twisted world? The framework of apartheid allows a comprehensive understanding grounded in international law of a situation of segregation, oppression, and domination by one racial group over another. Amnesty International notes and clarifies that systems of oppression and domination will never be identical. Therefore, it does not seek to argue that or assess whether any system of oppression and domination as perpetrated in Israel and the OPT, occupied Palestinian territories, is, for instance, the same or not analogous to the system of segregation, oppression, and domination as perpetrated in South Africa between 1948 and 1994. In other words, look, it's probably different, but we're going to use the same word anyway, because apartheid was specifically described what had happened in South Africa. Melanie Phillips, she says in her response to this, but then in page after page of tortuous argument, Amnesty grossly misstates and misinterprets international law in a brazen attempt to redefine apartheid itself and thus claim that Israel's behavior fits that spurious definition. Here was another tweet that came out. And people were like, they're apologetic. Honest Reporting said this. They call for a new definition of apartheid. And it says, they said they're just making it up. They miscite the Rome Statute. They're trying to get things in front of the International Criminal Court. They also say that, look, with regard to these refugee camps, yeah, there are refugee camps within the Palestinian areas of what they call the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. I've seen them with my own eyes. They're terrible. They look awful. But look, and this is what I said to the doctor from Gaza that I sat next to at dinner at Christ at the Checkpoint. I said, look, I get it. Balata and Nablus, it looks terrible. But I want to know, why is it, I see nice apartment buildings next door. Why are they still there after 70 years? The original generation is almost all gone. It seemed like this is one thing you can inherit. He goes, well, it's the occupation, John. It's the occupation. I said, okay, well, fine. I can go to Syria, I can go to Lebanon, I can go to Jordan. I can find the same, even worse refugee camps that your fellow Arabs will not take care of the refugees. What about them? What's that caused by? It's been 70 years, doctor. And he said, it's the occupation. What occupation? And a very nice guy, but, so the systems, it does not look like a great place. The NGO Monitor, which is another pro-Israel situation. Here's just a couple-minute interview on I-24 News with one of the vice president of that talking about this report.
What, in your perspective, is problematic in this report from Amnesty?
Hi, thanks for having me and for addressing this charade. I might say. I think Amnesty takes it to the next level this time. I mean, it is a known fact that Amnesty has a history of anti-Semitic incidents and its staff promoting anti-Semitism, bias. They promoting BDS, but this report takes it really to the next level. It sort of makes a charade of human rights issues and makes a charade of what Amnesty International claims it tries to do, to blame Israel of apartheid crimes, the only country in the world since this was an issue in South Africa, is nothing short of a scandal. Just so we have a broader context, Amnesty's 211 pages report that was released today blames Israel of state-owned apartheid since its creation in 1948. So if until now we discussed, we had discussions around whether there is legitimate criticism of certain policies of the state of Israel, whether there's a political discussion concerning what is done inside of Israeli borders and beyond what is called the 67 or the Green Line. Now Amnesty erases all that and basically equates what Israel does in Haifa, in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, in Ramallah, and in Gaza. Okay, it completely omits any notion of terror on the Palestinian side. It promotes the most blatant anti-Semitic tropes, like using terminology like Jewish domination over inferior Palestinian people. It blames Jewish national institutions like Jewish Agency and the World Zionist Organization of promoting state-owned discrimination, systematic ones, since the creation of the State of Israel. It basically artificially manipulates the laws of the State of Israel that is mainly there to preserve the Jewish identity of Israel as the only Jewish democracy in the world. Essentially, what the report does is calls for the destruction of the State of Israel as a Jewish state and as a manifestation of the Jewish right for self-determination.
And that's true. So this is Melanie Phillips, the Amnesty International hate group. Indeed, Amnesty's agenda is not human rights at all, but the dismantling of the Jews' human right to their own historic homeland. To underline this, CAMERA, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting, reveals a revealing discovery and an alert for the media it writes. Notably, in the originally circulated version of the report, Amnesty tipped its handwriting. This system of apartheid originated with the creation of Israel in May 1948. And so this is what this vice president from NGO Monitor said, exactly what she said in that interview. It's the creation of the Jewish state which caused this. After widespread condemnation in the final English language version, that version that was publicly released, Amnesty changed it to read, "This system of apartheid has been built and maintained over decades." Oh, well, that makes it all better. Good for you, Amnesty. Nevertheless, Melanie Phillips says the agenda behind this report remains perfectly clear. Amnesty thinks the Jewish state needs to be dismantled. Indeed, the intensity and obsession of its hatred for Israel, its inversion of victim and aggressor, and its disdain for Jewish suffering and Jewish human rights, it has the feel of the Palestinian Authority or Hamas propaganda. Go read her article at her Melanie Phillips at Substack. Anyway, CAMERA does a great article. I don't have time to go into it. NGO Monitor, their report that I was referenced in that interview, False Knowledge is Power, Deconstructing Definitions of Apartheid that Delegitimize the Jewish State. I did not get to, I got to tell you about this. So while they're negotiating in Vienna about the Iranian nuclear program, what does Iran do? It releases a new missile. that, of course, can reach Israel and beyond. And so this is a great editorial cartoon, I think. Here's the Vienna negotiating, and everybody's got a pen and paper, but Iran, they're using a missile. You see this is exactly what's going on. This is not even a misrepresentation. And this missile has a lot of firepower, and this is one of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps people talking about it. And so Iran is telling everybody what they're doing, what they're going to do. They've released this missile. It's called the Khaybar Shikan. I'll just show you a little bit of the video, and then I have one thing I'm going to add here because I want to close with that. And then we'll be done, I promise. Mostly, promise. My wife, I can hear the one laughing the loudest is my wife. I gave her card early, too. I shouldn't have done that. I lost all my leverage. So anyway, so this is what the Iranian missile can do. It's got impressive capabilities and accuracy, and this is a big concern in Israeli defense circles that they're upgrading their missiles. This allows them to punch way above their weight class, and they can cause a lot of disruption. We know what happened when Hamas launched their relatively weak and insignificant. They didn't launch missiles like this, but this is. There we go. Okay, that's the end of that. So let me add one thing here. I got to sign out of my. Hopefully this will work. Okay, now somebody sent this to me just as I was getting up here. And so I'm not going to vouch for the accuracy, but it's a New Yorker cartoon. So I know the person who's pretty trustworthy that sent this to me. But this person's from Canada, very politically involved. Now, do you see the dark, sinister force behind that editorial cartoon? That what's going to tear down democracy and society is a truck with free speech on the side. So listen, we live in a very dark world. Put on the whole armor of God. Share the gospel with people around you when you have an opportunity. Might work. Might sow the seeds for somebody else who comes along later. This is a very interesting time to live. Put on the whole armor of God, share the gospel, stand firm in the faith, stay in the Word of God, and act like men. That's what we need to do. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. We pray that you will give us opportunities to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with those around us, because that is the only hope for this world. And we all look forward to Jesus ultimately returning, taking care of this, cleaning it up, setting up his kingdom where he will rule and reign. Hasten the day, Lord. Hasten the day. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.